So my journey as a professional started as a health and safety advisor, and progressed with gaining what I call a lowercase e, where environmental management, compliance, the ISO 14001 standard was starting to emerge within business. And there was almost that blend of health and safety regulations and legislation, environmental regulations and legislation coming together, and where we started to become EHS, HSE or SHE specialists. And that's where I got my bug for environmental management, compliance, permitry, and kind of just that curiosity of how you can make the world a better place. And my career just evolved really of kind of using health and safety as a benchmark and appreciation of how do you engage, how do you influence, how do you drive change through safety, and actually just replicating that with environment. And my career then moved into a pure environmental role at one time as environmental operations manager at National Grid, which is actually a fantastic job that I had, mostly covering all parts of legislation across the UK, but equally bridging between environmental compliance and then sustainability of looking at climate change, looking at biodiversity and looking at circular economy, and how can environmental practices, ways of working be able to set good corner foundation stones to evolve a business into sustainability. And that's where sustainability, I wanted to become a true sustainability professional, do that as a full-time job. And as my career progressed, I was fortunate to land as head of sustainability at Freightliner, where we are looking at how do we decarbonise and achieve net zero as a business. How do we influence and understand the impact of climate change to the infrastructure, assets, people, and the goods and services and materials that we move as a business? And likewise of how do we enhance the biodiversity across our land holdings, and how do we set those really good responsible business practices for environmental management. And I guess the reason why sustainability for me is something that I'm passionate with, something that I really enjoy. I love engaging, I love talking, I love influencing and making the difference. And ultimately it's to drive a legacy for me. I want to look back in my career to say I've made a difference and I've made a change. So our mission statement for sustainability and ESG is that there is no time to sit back and wait. The belief of our business is that sustainability is going to be achieved through incremental improvements, using a variety of different multi-pronged programs, projects, assets, innovation, and that we just can't rest on our laurels of waiting for the solution to come. And I think what's really key is being that responsible business for us as well. So everything we do, how does that take into account sustainability and that wider ESG elements as well, from a social value piece of our kind of interaction with the local communities? How do we inspire the next generation of engineers and those through STEM? Focusing on women in rail, a really important topic for us as a business as well, of how do we get more women and a much more diverse group of people into our business that will really see an innovation in thinking and thought process to ultimately deliver our goals of what we've set into achieve for ESG and sustainability. Freightliner have a multitude of different frameworks, tools, and also mindset, I guess is what I want to pick out on here. So the frameworks are that we're aligned to the Science-Based Target Initiative, align ourselves to the latest climate science to ensure that our trajectory to being a net zero business by at least 2050 can be achieved. It's a great benchmark and a great way to show how the business needs to go through its step-by-step decarbonisation programme, both looking at a short-term and a long-term aspect. What we've also aligned ourselves to is TCFD, so the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosure, and making sure that we are looking at governance, strategy, risk management and metrics, and how is the exec driving that across the business and actually disclosing that externally voluntarily next year within our annual account and reports. What I'm also going to add is the kind of mindset that's in Freightliner. It's very much of an agile focus that we as a business take towards decarbonisation, achieving net zero. It's a fail fast approach. So what we recognise is that failure and success will go hand in hand. They have to if we're going to achieve to be net zero, and that where we succeed, we celebrate. It's a great positive reinforcement and we proceed on. But equally, failure is not a negative. It's seen as an opportunity to learn, to adapt, evaluate, and actually determine, is there slight tweaks and methodology work that we can do to it, or simply that it isn't working right now and that we need to understand if technology or innovation is going to proceed for us. And that reduces that fear, I would say, of failing, and knowing that everything we do may not succeed in our decarbonisation journey to achieve net zero, but that's okay, because we've got to go through that learning to get better, to then proceed and progress. And without that, we would be sitting back and waiting for a magic bullet or that solution to land in our lap. And we don't see that coming anytime soon. And therefore, we've got to go out and find and source those ideas to drive innovation. So there's two, I would say, is cost and clarity. Cost in the business is really key. There isn't a surplus of cash, I would say, across the logistics and transportation businesses in the UK, and therefore the decisions have to be made on a very proportionate of economics, commercial, spend, and sustainability. And it's that true balance of making sure that it is a sustainable business practice that we can implement as well. And I'll give an example. There are some fantastic alternative fuels that give real low carbon emissions when compared to diesel, but they will almost cost double at the moment of what the price per litre is. That's prohibitive, and that's something that we can't afford to do, and we can't afford to pass through to our customers because they can't afford it either. And therefore there's going to be those hindrances of the economics themselves, and we really seek kind of incentives and support to be able to reduce that gap between the diesel and alternative fuel prices as well. And I also say clarity. The future is unknown within the sector themselves. We use rail traction, so locomotive traction, both diesel and electric. We also have a road fleet and operate reach stackers, all fueled with diesel. And what we need is the clarity, really, of what does the future look like for the railway network? What does it look like for the road network? There are fantastic ideas: hydrogen, electric, bi-mode, tri-mode, but it's the infrastructure that is needed to be able to support the transportation and logistics industries to ultimately back the right horse. I think what we are worried about is choosing the wrong assets and how the infrastructure will evolve. And if that clarity is there, that we will have infill electrification on the railway, that will support the growth of rail freight and open up 95% of the rail network for freight to run on electric. Absolutely fantastic. I think then that can give us the clarity and the confidence that we can choose electric fleets across our locomotives, and then be able to work out how do we run the first and last miles if they're needed to get into the inland terminals. I think that's really key over the next 5 to 10 years. Without that, that's going to cause a lot of trouble and a kind of hesitation in businesses to choose and adopt alternative and lower fuel carbon emissions. There are two ways, really, I would say, that we measure sustainability in Freightliner. That is data, so good, robust, traceable, assured data to show the improvements. And that's very much about what I would say is the input and the output of the business. So understanding the data can then help support what's material to the business, where does it need to focus, and how do we respond to that data. But equally, the outcomes show those incremental improvements that we're making, and that actually we are having a material change, be it in our carbon emissions, be it in the improvement of biodiversity, be it that we're actually improving the social value across the business and how we are interacting externally. But I'd also say what's really key, and that kind of tangibility, is engagement, the conversation. It's kind of almost the stuff that you can't put a number to, but actually you're inspiring people to think differently, you're inspiring innovation. That stuff has I think the bigger impact and the longer term aspects of actually determining what do we need to do, and equally how and why do we need to do that as well. And I think as much as the data is very good to tell the story and the narrative and to showcase that the improvements we're making, I think the engagement and the conversation is so much more hard hitting. If we're going to achieve the targets that we've set as a business, we're going to need not just the academics, the theories, the theorists, or me as a sustainability professional, we're going to need the great people that we have in our business. And just kind of looking outside and seeing those people right now, I think they are really, really key, because they are the thinkers, they're the doers, they're the people that do the job and see, taste and smell that job day in, day out. And without them, we're not going to get that insight of what can be done, what can't be done, what's been done beforehand, what hasn't necessarily worked. And I think that is really, really key to the measure of success. I guess the biggest one we see, and it's in the press, it's in the news, there's a real big focus on it, is about greenwashing. I think that is something that's really, really problematic in the industry. I think there's the right intent at times, but the execution and the impact is massive. And I think that is probably the biggest failing. What I would also say, kind of how I kind of perceive and look at each company, is that there's a different maturity within each company and how they approach sustainability. There's no right or wrong way. There's no silver bullet out there to say this is the blueprint, this is how you achieve it. We've got to go through our own ways, the kind of the DNA, the way that a business operates, its culture, the behaviours and the attitudes that make that culture are all different, and they shape differently and they look differently and they feel differently. And I think that's kind of a real key point of when we benchmark. It isn't saying we're better than them or they're better than us. It's an appreciation of what they're trying to achieve and the narrative of why they're trying to achieve it. I think is really, really key, rather than kind of saying, they haven't reduced their emissions, they're not on track to achieve net zero or carbon neutrality, etc. It's just very much about, we're in this together as a profession, and therefore that collaboration, understanding and sharing is really, really key, so we don't fall into that trap of greenwashing, green rinsing, green lighting, and kind of all the other buzzwords that are kind of starting to appear and emerge as a profession and as a business. I think it's really key to have a plan that has incremental steps, and that it's looking in a focus the short term and the goals that the business needs to achieve with an eye on the longer term, but knowing that the longer term shouldn't influence directly where you are today. It's that North Star of what we're striving for, but knowing that there's going to be different pathways, different routes that need to be taken, and it's accepting that some of those pathways will never come to fruition. But it's also that flexibility, that sustainability shouldn't be seen as a bolt-on. It shouldn't be seen as something that just happens in the background. It needs to be at the heart of a business. And therefore, the route to that, from my professional kind of opinion, is it's got to have the flex to be able to move with the market, with the economics and where the business is trying to strive to. And therefore, it can help support, guide the business, meeting its needs of its investors, of its internal stakeholders, and then those customers, clients and external stakeholders as well. But what I'd also say is the focus on the sustainability professionals is resilience, and know that the focus on well-being, because it is tough. You're trying to drive change through a business, and that could be tough at times. That can be hitting brick walls. That could be achieving very, very little over weeks or months. But it's to know that the difference is being made, and to always take a step back and kind of revert back to where you started and where you've got to, and seeing the little value and the benefits are there and that they're growing, and actually they make up the bigger element of sustainability. So I guess there's four at the moment, and I guess these will evolve massively over the next 20, 30 years. So the key ones for us are decarbonisation, enhancing ecosystems and biodiversity, responding to the threat of climate change and the impact of climate change, and good environmental practice. So for decarbonisation, is how do we achieve our reduction of 55% by 2033, and accelerating our desire to be a net zero business by at least 2050. That's really key. We have a pathway, we have a program of works, and we have a series of projects that, if implemented and if technology and innovation grows, we will be able to achieve and be able to deliver a net zero operation from terminal, rail and roads across our business. Enhancing biodiversity, I would say that's linked to climate change and how we respond to it, but also decarbonisation. And I think biodiversity is an emerging topic that will be the brother, sister of climate change. And that's going to happen in the next 5 years or so. There's a real kind of movement that isn't being seen and felt, I don't think, across business. And we want to be at the forefront of that. I think the response to climate change is one that is really kind of unknown in its entirety of actually what does it truly mean. I think we are suffering the effects of climate change, and therefore we've got to make sure that our business is resilient. And how do we use those risks and opportunities and the kind of holistic enterprise risk management programs that we have to influence the decisions that we make now, but also equally in the future about what's the future loco need to look like if we are suffering hotter temperatures and kind of wetter climate as well, the risk of flooding, and how do we respond to that, as well as underground water movements, coastal erosion as well. All of those are going to have to influence and how do we adapt as a business. And then it's good environmental practices, so looking at the circular economy and what do we do with waste, how do we interact with permits, water, and making sure that we don't cause pollution to the precious water courses that we have, and that commodity as well. And I think that's what the future needs to look like, is that kind of those practices and programs aren't just me leading those, but they're integrated into the business. And just like health and safety has done over the last 20, 30 years, environmental sustainability becomes a real key influencer and a value that's driving decision making of where best to spend money, how best to operate. And I think that will be what success looks like for us as a business.